Fast Forward Productions. The women are speaking.
This is Initiated Survivor, where we share survivors' voices and our stories of recovery and reclaiming our power. I'm Kelsey Harper. I'm a clinical psychologist and a survivor, and I like to share helpful tips and skills about recovery from trauma. As a community of survivors, we have tremendous power to change the world, so thank you so much for being here. Here we discuss stories and information that is relevant to survivors of gender-based violence and sexual violence. These topics may be triggering and are for adult ears only, so please be mindful of your needs throughout. Thank you so much, Michelle, for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. We're coming together to talk with Michelle Hirschman of Hirschman Clinical Services. We're talking about vicarious trauma and helping professionals, specifically like therapists, social workers, coaches, that kind of thing. Michelle, I brought you on specifically because I'm interested in hearing more about your experience with seeing this, but also some of the things that you've come up with and have been offering the therapists, the professional community, the recovery treatment community, as additional supports that I think are really unique and really helpful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Kelsey. This is so lovely. I love the topic that you want to speak about. I think you're such a creative spirit in the field, so I'm grateful to have the opportunity to connect with you.
Thank you. So can you, before we get started, just to kind of give everybody a way of getting oriented, can you share a little bit about yourself, about the work that you do, about Hirschman Clinical Services?
Yeah, sure. Hirschman Clinical Services is close to 20 years in. I started it when I was an intern, so there was definitely a couple of years before I got licensed before we launched. The basis of it is that we do coaching work with folks with chronic mental health issues, eating disorders, and substance abuse, sometimes a combination thereof. And we're a mobile coaching team that go out into the community and help people with lots of different life skills. We usually tend to catch folks post-treatment. So we're helping them implement the tools and skills that they learned in real time so that they are successful and don't have to go back to treatment again. So that's kind of been the premise of Hirschman Clinical Services for all these years. I've got a team in Los Angeles and now in Missouri and Kansas. I moved to Missouri about 5 years ago, so I'm back and forth to LA. So we've been able to expand services, which has been great, to the Midwest. And yeah, so it's been lovely and wonderful. I'm a licensed clinical social worker doing this, so I'm able to collaborate with practitioners and therapists and psychiatrists and be able to kind of speak the language and understand what's going on.
Yeah, you and I have worked together on a few cases throughout, the last several years. So I'm very familiar with your work and your group. Some of the best collaboration I've ever had working in treatment has been working with your teams. And so I've always been so impressed with your coaches, with the work that you guys offer. It truly is really exceptional. And I think something that is really valuable and needed in our field, that people have support like yours. And so I'm really happy that you're here and we can share that with everybody too.
Yeah, it's always nice to work with therapists that are collaborative and want to be able to kind of go back and forth so we can best support the folks that we're working with together as a team.
Yeah, especially and I think as you were identifying the kind of clients and the issues that we work with, they're typically people that are coming in with multiple issues that they're trying to stabilize, recover from, that kind of thing. And so they are dealing with a lot of different pulls that are coming in and a lot of different skills they're trying to implement and changes they're trying to put in their life. Like you said, post-treatment, coming out of residential treatment of some sort, going into living life on their own and trying to do it very differently than they did before. And that can be really, really tough, really, really engrossing work, especially too, because we're in every single moment of the client's life trying to help them implement a skill or do a different kind of approach than they had before to try to make sure that we stabilize their recovery. And so part of what I really wanted to talk with you about, because you've also worked so closely with building a team and developing a team, and you offer supervision for your teams, for your coaches, for your therapists that are out there doing this type of work. And you're also very closely involved in all of the cases, which is also really special and unique too, that the person who is in charge and kind of overseeing everything is also really hands-on clinically. But I'm wanting to do this kind of special little mini series about vicarious trauma in helping professionals, because this is a topic that's been very in my mind ever since I myself was an intern. When you said that you started this business as an intern, I was like, oh my gosh, that's badassery right there. So
And the supervisor's like, I'm just going to kind of like watch you and just oversee me and see how we're going to go with this.
well, it's amazing. I mean, this is awesome what you've built. But that it's something that's been hanging on in my mind for a while, and just kind of observing my own process. As a new therapist, I was someone who like fully swan dived into the work, swan dove, whatever, into the work of like, I want to help. I want to be a change maker in this world. I really want things to shift in these really, really big ways, as I think many of us, go into this work, and definitely did not have realistic expectations as to how to do that or how that would look. And there is a tremendous amount of burnout or things building to burnout, and as well as vicarious trauma. And I've talked in previous episodes about what the difference is between those two, but particularly vicarious trauma for therapists, and that many of us as therapists, and I've shared this before on my podcast, I'm one of them, have our own traumatic histories as well. And so can come in and be very vulnerable and at risk of developing, higher stress or trauma symptoms in response to clients in the process of recovery from trauma and traumatic events and stuff like that. And so you've worked with teams very closely. You've worked with clients very closely. You've worked with teams that have been working with clients with really high needs for decades. So I'm wanting to hear a little bit about what are some of the things that you've noticed or observed around vicarious trauma and burnout that you've witnessed either in yourself, on your teams, that really stands out to you or just kind of tells you more about what we're facing as helping professionals with this.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, like where do you start with this? I mean, I think one of the things that's really important when going into the trenches with any client is like acknowledging and recognizing what we might relate to personally, so that you can connect and be compassionate, but also not project, and you can kind of, the way that we professionals tackle our issues may not always be the same as that individual. And I think that sometimes backfires a lot in the addiction world, because a lot of times folks in the addiction world feel like, okay, well, this is how I got sober. This is how you're going to get sober. And I don't agree with that. I think that everybody's very different and we need to individualize what works for everybody. But I think that, over the years, so we're mobile, we go to people's homes, we enter people's life, and we, 90% of the time we're watching people be successful, and they discharge from us because they have launched into the world and they've gotten work and they're in their kind of mode. And then there's like a 10% that really struggle and being successful in the way that they want to be. And we're there in the trenches of crisis. We've had clients that have been suicidal. We've driven them to the hospital. Let's see, from a vulnerable situation, we've had 2 clients that have suicided under our care. And so to be of support to the coaches, let alone myself, has been challenging. Thank God for all the different modalities of support. I think it also has accelerated me this year, which I'll get into a little bit about the holistic healer modality piece that I've really integrated into the work at HCS is, EMDR has been extremely useful, at least for myself and for my coaches, especially when you're a resourced individual to begin with, which we hope that all mental health professionals are, that they have some internal resourcing so that they can go into the field and help others. But that is a really great modality to go and really work through trauma quickly. So that has been an extreme resource for me. And I have this specific EMDR person I go to. But I think that is one thing that I share with my coaches, is that we're not looking for the perfect, human to help others. We're looking to make sure that everybody that is trying to help another person has their own supports in place, that we're always constantly working on ourselves. Anybody that I hire that's a coach, I encourage them, without requiring, that they have their own therapist or they have their own counseling community, because this work is hard and you will burn out, and people burn out all the time, and they do really bad things in the phase of burnout. So you want to catch your burnout before it actually happens and feel it out. So it's super important to constantly take your pulse. And listen, we're humans, right? So we're going to be faced with all different kinds of things. My father passed a couple weeks ago. So do I just stop working because I had a passing? I need to identify my grief. I need to identify, am I able to be focused enough to be in front of somebody, even though I'm feeling sad or angry or whatever process I'm going through? Because I educate my clients all the time about the grief process. And so I think it's super important that we're constantly checking in with ourselves as professional so that we don't end up going into the trauma reaction of our clients. I guess I'm going to go to the holistic healing component, kind of fast forward. In the last 2 years, due to some of my own personal challenges behind the scenes, I really gravitated towards researching holistic healers of all modalities for myself, and then potentially now to educate clients and the public and professionals in particular of these adjunct services that can really accelerate and support us and resources to be the best healers that we are. And I have found that very enriching. And I feel like it's definitely a piece that we're not educated in if we're like MFT, LCSW. Like, this is not part of our curriculum of study. They don't really educate us on these pieces because they're not all science-based. Yet there is a lot of research going on as to why. Like, for example, we just had a webinar with an astrologist, and she actually has a science background. So she was actually bringing a lot of information to us as to why the astrological charts can be useful information in learning about ourselves and resourcing us and seeing where our blind spots are. So I'm seeing the importance of utilizing some of the holistic healer world to support professionals in particular. And so I'm hoping that they can kind of look at that and see what support might speak to them.
Yeah, it's such a wonderful invitation. And I think that's such a lovely way of also putting it out there of like, this is here. You can gently enter this space if you would like to. And backing up a little bit, because I think one of the things that you said that was really important and really cool was about making it very clear that you and your therapist, you're allowing everybody to be human when they're entering the space. Like, no one's expected to be perfect in their mental health and wellness. And it's expected that they are practicing things to try to take care of themselves, that you as their supervisor are also supporting them in that. And that really struck me because, and I'm like, speaking of astrology, as a Virgo with perfectionistic tendencies, that my own experience of some of that was this idea that I needed to show up exactly right for my clients and exactly perfect, and put a tremendous amount of pressure of like, this is their like one time a week, or sometimes, meeting with clients several times a week, that this is the one time in their life that they're getting this type of help and support and treatment. And while I think that's important to keep in mind, and clearly I struggle with letting go of that perfectionism, my mind kept going to, so therefore I have to have zero problems. I have to be in the exact right mood, and I have to not be affected. I have to be like this, just like solid rock that's rooted, that they can hold on to no matter what is happening in the room. And this was also like very fully self-inflicted. Well, maybe not fully self-inflicted, like patriarchy and capitalism gets in there too, but definitely had supportive supervisors who are telling me not to do that. And so I think it's really nice that you kind of start off with your team already saying like, hey, these are things that are going to come up. You are in the trenches with people in some of the hardest moments of their lives. And especially I think in the phase of recovery that you're meeting clients at, because it's kind of the first time that we're going to really see what happens and what's coming up that contributes to things like addiction and eating disorders, things that, where the client is now like kind of their psychology is stripped bare of some of its primary coping mechanisms. And that means that we're being revealed the things that were impossible to deal with. And there's a lot of darkness to that for a lot of people. And it is a very important and also very difficult role to be with people through that. And so I really like how you're inviting people that they can, be human. They're in their own therapy, they're doing their own work. And then you also kind of mentioned like, because when we're on the track with burnout, we can do some harm, which is something that definitely is concerning. When you think about your teams, because your teams are definitely in the trenches, what are some of the signs that you recognize that maybe indicate that if one of your people were like me and very perfectionistic, or you just saw that the stress was mounting, like what would kind of tip you off that maybe they were struggling with some burnout?
When I interview everybody, I always let them know that I'm on call for them 7 days a week. because if they're working, I'm working. I want to be available. So I've created a communication line where most of the time they're letting me know what's going on and if they're challenged. Typically, when they start calling me a little bit more frequently and they're frustrated because the client isn't making the changes that, the client's hoping and they're hoping, and strategically, usually frustration is a flag. I like to kind of get in there and be like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's kind of get back to the roots of who this person is, what our job is, how we're a facilitator. We can't make them do anything. Our goals are their goals, and we're there to come up with creative solutions to help them get there and hold them accountable and support them. And that's usually what they sign up for. And so when frustration comes up, if they get sick a lot, I will check in with them. We'll look at their caseload. Sometimes we will have to move things around. I make sure that when we're dealing with certain clients with certain diagnoses, we spread it out. Like having certain types of people can be really heavy on the soul. So we are very cautious about that piece. I also make sure at interview if there's certain types of clients that can be quite triggering. And that's an insight that we get as professionals. Like, you know what, when I work with this may not be the best fit because I haven't fully developed in this area, or it's just something that is too much for me right now. Like that is really great when professionals can identify that for themselves and know what their strengths are and what their challenges are. It really benefits the clients. But usually frustration, like chronic medical issues, are usually flags for me. The type of content and how they describe their experience with their client sometimes changes too when they start getting into a burnout. But the system and the infrastructure in which I create, we have mental health days. I really encourage weekends. I really have them vocalize what they need on a regular basis so that our full-time position is 20 hours of client contact. I don't believe that clinicians should be, at least at the level that we're doing from a therapeutic coaching model that I created, it's too much to do more than 20 hours of client contact. Try to compensate accordingly and so that we can have the quality of care. So it creates a little bit less burnout in that capacity. And so the coaches are pretty appreciative of that too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, what you were sharing really stands out. In a previous episode, I went into what are the signs of vicarious trauma like in ourselves. And I think when you brought up the frustration, like getting frustrated with clients not doing the thing that we're telling them to do, not making the changes that we want for them. And that brought up to mind, one of the ones of like getting stuck in rigidity and losing complexity and creativity. Like you mentioned, the whole purpose of the role of coaches in the way that you work is to creatively come up with solutions to problems that are honoring the client's needs, goals, and their personal values. And it's such a normal human experience to have, to just be like, this person just needs to do this thing and then this will stop, and they just won't. And that's kind of when we get so like rigidly like just stuck in the solution and this one specific solution. They either need to do this, they need to look at recovery a certain way, or they need to use these certain skills in this direction, or they need to start attending these types of services, or, engaging in this type of community, that kind of thing. And losing that type of flexibility to flow with a client can be such a powerful indicator to ourselves, because it is like we're exhausted, our creative mind is tapped, and we're also like part of that frustration is like, I just need this problem to be better. I'm getting fatigued and in pain. And saying that, I want to make it clear, like, this is not the client's fault that like therapists get burnt out, or therapists have vicarious trauma. This isn't the client's fault. This is just a natural part of being very, very real, genuine humans entering space with humans. Like if we want to build solid relationships with our clients, we are vulnerable with them in that way. And so I liked how you said that you notice those things like somatic complaints or medical issues coming up, things where the body is just getting really fatigued and stuff like that is coming up, and making note of that. And as a supervisor, keeping your eye out and, making a note to then make some changes, which is a way that you're also impacting your micro community of your team to make sure that it has space and holds space for addressing burnout and vicarious trauma, which is really awesome. I think that's something that a lot of people want to achieve, but really don't like effectively know how to. And I think that sounds like you really have figured out a way to do that effectively, which is wonderful.
Well, I think we're teaching people to communicate, right? I mean, that's usually challenge amongst probably everybody that we work with is just like clear communication to themselves and to others. And so with the coaches, it's so important to be able to have the ability to connect and to talk about it transparently so that doesn't bundle up. And then it gives me a sense of being able to track and see where things are going. And it takes it out of the session. It takes the power out. So if you are in a frustrated place, it's like, okay, let's get it out so it doesn't go sideways in a session. It's built into our coaching practice that monthly, about every 4 to 6 weeks, we do an evaluation with our clients where they self-evaluate and we can give some input on what's working, what's not working. And it really gives us an opportunity to say, hey, like, are you feeling frustrated? Like, do you feel like this isn't working? Are you feeling like we're not flowing? Because we can always change things up. And I think it's important to sometimes say, yes, you know what? This hasn't been working. We need to shake this up. And it's very empowering for the client and it's empowering for the coach, to say, yeah, this hasn't been working and we want our goals or your goals. Let's figure something else out. So I think that is also super useful in kind of troubleshooting things that come up. But
yeah, we could write a whole book about being able to, as helping professionals, how we go about being open to and really creating space for clients to share feedback in that way. And I'm not sure about like when you were getting trained and educated, if you had this experience, I'll be interested to hear. But I definitely had the experience of like, anytime that, a client is sharing not necessarily negative feedback, but just saying something's not working, it's resistance or it has something to do with their issues that they're projecting into this space. And that the therapeutic relationship is really about providing this projective medium for the client to work through those issues, which was also just another way of saying like, oh no, it's not your fault, therapist. And it's not a problem that's happening in the therapeutic relationship or something that needs to be addressed, something that needs to change in the client. And I think a lot of like my own kind of trajectory as a therapist with developing and growing has been about unlearning that of like how we respect our clients' dignity and autonomy and agency in our work. In one of those ways is by asking them for feedback and really like taking it very seriously and respecting it. And that also can mean that as therapists, like we're being vulnerable, opening up to receiving negative feedback, but it's such a powerful skill of being able to tolerate hearing that something's not working and approaching it from a place of like, I really want to help this client do well. And so if something in the relationship isn't working, like I'm going to approach it from a problem-solving place, an empathic place on how to make that more effective. And I liked how you said this is very empowering for the client and the therapist because it does then help make it less personal. Like it's not like I'm a broken therapist who can't make this client do this thing. It's more like, no, this method and this approach isn't working, or this relationship is maybe not the most effective one, or there's certain things that are happening in the relationship that isn't quite working. And it's not about my quality as a provider or my quality as a person, but is a very like human nature type of thing. Like we have issues in our relationships where we don't all think the same and operate the same. And so there can be different kinds of like impasses that happen around that. And so building that in is just like part of like every 4 to 6 weeks, your coaches are getting feedback about how they're doing with their clients, and their clients are being asked to offer that feedback. I imagine is really strengthening and powerful for folks, but it also can be think like what you're illuminating. Another way that we get feedback about where our burnout is when clients are like, yeah, there's this thing that is not working. There's this impasse. Like we're not able to get past this point. I wanted to come back to what you were talking about, holistic healers group that you've come up with and the workshops that you're doing. I really resonated with that because in my own trauma recovery, like it was just like going for all of the things, like any of the things. One of the things that I always really appreciated about Los Angeles is that any type of healing modality that you could ever imagine is available. And that feels like such a wonderful privilege of living in LA is that there's just this abundance of resources in that. Like I experienced and got a lot of like Reiki healing, and I became a Reiki master teacher myself because it was so powerful. EMDR, doing that, acupuncture, all kinds of stuff, like different types of yoga and meditation and sound baths, like going for like anything and everything that can help. And like you said, like we're not trained on this in school, and many ways, like also told that we need to avoid integrating the two, in a sense with our work. And also like just even personally, I found it incredibly powerful and hopeful. I have a lot of clients who talk about their experiences with this type of thing, like engaging any kind of spirituality and spiritual practices being really powerful as well. I saw my own recovery really, really transform with engaging in different spiritual practices. So I think there's something really wonderful about you bringing a group together and offering these workshops and webinars for professionals to like kind of get their feet in the door with some of these things, being invited into like really legitimately look at these things that are helpful without the fear of being judged or violating any lines around what we've been taught. Can you speak a little bit more about this group and how it came about and what it offers?
Yeah, some of it was just organic based on some of the personal research I was doing on my own behalf. I mean, I've always been a seeker. In my mid-20s, it kind of launched when I dealt with my quarter life crisis. And I very much like you was seeking whatever I needed to kind of deal with the issues I was dealing with at the time. My searching kind of stopped as I approached my 30s. And so I just got back to it now in my late 40s because I was talking to my girlfriends and colleagues. They're like, oh, you're just going back to it, girl. And it's great because, it's with a different lens and different depth. And I'm also looking at it, I'm pretty protective of the clients I work with, let alone myself. So, just trying to figure out like, how do you even filter an astrologist? What makes one astrologist good? What makes the other? Just like there's therapists out there that aren't very good either, and can do really bad things. Just like, astrologists can probably be the same. So what are the different lenses? And so I got really excited talking to these people and just having a different perspective and lens. I'm somebody that's been in therapy for, God, probably on and off for 20 years with the same therapist. And so I love therapy. I think it's great. I think it's good to plug in when you need to, but to have these adjunct perspectives on life challenges that come up in life is pretty powerful. And so, when I was experiencing these kind of panic attacks again that I had like in my 20s, I wanted to really kind of figure out if there was other things I could be doing because therapy wasn't working anymore. I was exercising all the time. I was eating really well. I was taking my supplements, like what was missing. And so looking at it from a different lens, energy wise, like I went to a Reiki lady and it was life changing. I was able to deal with my anxiety like pretty quickly. I didn't need 20 therapy sessions. It was like within 2 sessions, all of a sudden the panic subsided. So being able to like share that piece with other people. Now, some people may not have the same exact experience I had. Like I wouldn't necessarily tell my clients, hey, if you have anxiety, all you need to do is go to Reiki. It's just another way of hitting it. Because we're all so different. Our makeup's different. We're all in different paths of healing. But to ignore that could be something that can accelerate, because that's what coaching does. Like I'm always about like, hey, and most of the clients that come to us, they don't want to sit in their pain and discomfort. That is part of the learning, but ultimately like they want to learn how to get out of it, get out of the discomfort. So being able to have these adjunct services to be able to help accelerate, or if they're stuck and they're not connecting dots, like, because sometimes therapy can only take you so far where you're like, wait a minute, but why do I keep doing this behavior? And there's just a block. It didn't work for them, or they're just not ready for it. And they're just not kind of mapped to do that. Sometimes some of these psychic, intuitive, past life regression, human design, these are all different types of healers that I've had on these webinars to educate the public. They can really help maybe say, hey, I'm wondering if it's this that is causing this, where it can kind of ignite this flame of like, oh, there's my missing piece. Now I can go back to therapy in a whole different light. And I've seen that. I've seen that with clients that have done these holistic healers without me even referencing it. I'm gradually kind of going into it now when clients are feeling stuck. I just recently with a client that had eating disorders, I said, hey, like, have you ever tried Reiki? She's like, actually, I did try Reiki one time and it felt really good. What are you thinking? And I'm like, well, I don't know, just something that could be useful. Why don't you look at this website and see if it resonates with you? So being able to do that, not only, for clients, but obviously professionals, it's really a calling to me right now from my personal experiences and also just educating the public. Why wouldn't we? There's so much more suffering than there has ever been. Mental illness is on the rise. Suicidality is on the rise. Let's hit it in all different directions, because the traditional therapies are only taking us so far. Like we all deserve all of the modalities that can support us.
Yeah, I really love that. And especially speaking to burnout and vicarious trauma and how those modalities can be so powerful and helpful as well, and that bringing in kind of this multidisciplinary, first there's this peer support group that's really nice. And then there's also all these webinars that you're inviting people into. It is such this lovely space of us being able to look at what our needs are as helping professionals with these rising crises, especially because we're living in the same world that our clients are living in. And so the stressors that are facing our clients, we are facing as well, in addition to, our own history and background. And so there's something that I think is also really compassionate and loving about gently inviting people in of like, here's this thing if you want to learn more about it that you could use if you want to. And like, there's this tool, this resource that I didn't have because people didn't point me here. I'm going to point you there, with this idea that it's not about abandoning things that we know. It's actually about just building out more that we have.
I haven't really talked about the professionals group that I launched. I had launched it during COVID because we were all so isolated. And I was like, we need to exchange resources. How are we doing the work that we're doing? How are we maintaining our own calmness? So it started then, and that lasted about 2 years, and then we kind of stopped it. And then I just picked it up again because I realized I really wanted to continue to have an exchange with professionals, with resources, with making sure that I was staying in tune with like great referrals, and then also just having a general support, for each other, because we all do really hard work and we don't always, it's actually hard to plug into group therapies for ourselves. Say we're feeling a little stressed, but like we don't really want to go into a group with our clients. So it's nice to have just kind of a higher level professional group that we could just get vulnerable in. Like, hey, my dad passed. Like, what do people usually do? When you had a passing, like there's no rule book on like when we're supposed to go back to work. And, it's all very individualized, but it's sometimes nice to be able to exchange information with each other on how we're doing hard things.
Yeah. And I think that's something I've attended the group and will continue to attend because I absolutely loved it. That is really unique about it is that it's not just a group of professionals coming around and going through cases, but that the group is like, it has therapists and coaches and other people that are involved in recovery in a variety of ways, energy healers, astrologists, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of folks in there. And we talk about more personal, vulnerable things as professionals of like, what are we going through as humans, as people in this world? And, what do we do to get support through that as well as getting support from each other? And it's such a lovely approach. We're not centering like our clients and what they need. We're getting our needs met through it, which is really nice. And so I think that provides such a powerful space for professionals. And that's one of the things that I think can be one of the most important healers for us is our own community and connecting in. And you built a perfect one for that because it's virtual. Everybody can come to it. You invite everybody on the social media to email you to get the links and stuff like that. And it's a really wonderful thing on Mondays at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So
it's the first Monday of the month, and the rest of the Mondays were all the holistic healers being interviewed by me. But yeah, anybody that's in the healing profession of any. I have had an accountant come in and I'm like, you know what? You do help us.
Yes, I will say my accountant has definitely helped me with a lot of stress. So, well, thank you so much for being here today and for doing this with me. We're going to tag all of your stuff in the show notes below so people can find you. Is there anything that you want to shout out before we quickly wrap up?
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I love that you're doing this podcast. I definitely want to do a shout out to you for just being vulnerable and giving this information out and talking to a lot of us. And I welcome anybody to our webinars. We have really great, magical people that are reputable that can really serve you in different ways. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to Sam Valentine and her team at Fast Forward Productions for editing, producing, publishing, and all-around podcast magic that makes this podcast possible. If you found something that resonated with you, please rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. This simple but meaningful action really helps increase the visibility and accessibility of this podcast to survivors and allies that may be looking for some support and connection. I love connecting with listeners and allies, so please feel free to share this episode on your socials and go ahead and tag me in it at Initiated Survivor or at Kelsey J. Harper. A final but very important note. While I am a clinical psychologist, This episode and this podcast does not constitute professional mental health care or therapy, nor is it a replacement for professional therapy. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The podcast host and the guests are not rendering professional advice and should not be considered to have developed a professional relationship. If you are looking for mental health care or professional help, please seek it out. We have some links in the show notes that may help you with that, or you can contact your insurance carrier directly for referrals.